Happy Wednesday and welcome to today's webinar. We are excited to have you. This is the fourth installment of our Donor Upgrade Masterclass. And so if you've joined us for the previous 3 installments, welcome back. And if this is your first time joining us, welcome. We've got just 30 minutes set aside for today's presentation. So I'm going to get through these next few slides as quickly as I can before we get into the main part of today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded, and if you have to drop early or had a colleague who wanted to join, we will be sending the recording and slides to your inbox within 24 hours. So just keep an eye out for that in your inbox. Take a second to find the Q&A icon in your Zoom toolbar. That's where you'll be able to interact with our speakers. We've tried to save some time at the end of today's presentation for your questions, but if we run out of time, we invite you to stick around for a few extra minutes to have your questions answered. If you have to drop, we'll still answer it, and you will see your answer in the recording once it's shared. And then the next and final installment of today's webinar, or of this webinar series rather, is going to take place on Wednesday, the 30th of March. And we'll be going over some kind of final applications about this from the Donor Upgrade series and look at some technology tools that you can explore to track progress and identify those major and mid-level giving prospects within your file. All right, with those introductions out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. So first we have Stephen Asare, and Stephen is the Senior Manager of Donor Appreciation at Moody Bible Institute, where he facilitates donor relations for their mid-level giving program. He also fosters partnerships between Moody and global organizations. Stephen, did I totally butcher your last name?
Well, that's totally fine. It's Asare. That's
Asare. Fine. I had one of those moments as I was saying that I was like, if I say Asare and it's wrong, I'm going to be embarrassed. And if I say Asare, it's going to be wrong. And we also have Kristen Priest, and Kristen serves as Vice President Client Solutions with over 15 years experience as a consultant, coach, and fundraiser. Kristen has been our mid-level and major giving rock star and guru, and so we are excited to have her with us today to share her expertise with you. So without any further ado, Kristen, why should organizations consider starting or strengthening their mid-level giving program?
Thanks, Leah. Excited to be here today. So there's 4 key reasons, I think, or values that a healthy mid-level program can give to an organization. Let's talk through those, Leah. Let's go ahead and jump to that next slide. It's retention, upgrade, grow, and pipeline. Those are the 4 keys or the pillars I like to look for when I'm looking at how can we make an organization robust and healthy. We know our mid-level donors retain at some of the highest rates, 60 and 70%. They're more loyal than our planned gift or major donors on a year in, year out giving basis. Frankly, often they overlap and are similar and are the same as our planned gift donors. But they stick with us, they stick around. Many of them give in that sustainer or monthly giving pattern. Conversely, we also know that the retention can be a threat. We can see dropping points when they make that gift that increases them to a mid-level donor. And if we don't respond differently to their decision to give differently with us, that relationship can be at risk. Also upgrade. We can create a community of ambassadors driving an overall lift in giving for those donors where a major gift isn't going to be part of their giving experience. A healthy mid-level program can lift the overall file of our mid-level donors. Grow. We want to see more donors joining that community of mid-level donors where we can create a meaningful, repeatable experience for them. And finally, pipeline. A healthy mid-level program can quickly and early identify not just who are our major donors this year, next year, and the year after, but what does our major donor pathway look like 3 to 5 years from now? So really with those 4 things, that's what we want to look for when we say, how do we build up a healthy mid-level program? And with that, let's jump into a conversation with Stephen. So Stephen, you were doing some really great things for mid-level donors, but the last couple of years, as we all experienced this significant kind of challenge to ourselves to rethink how we engaged and interacted, it almost gave you a great opportunity where you kind of said, "Well, let me challenge myself. Let's think about this, and how do we formalize and stand up and really build out a mid-level program?" So, talk a little bit about kind of where you were, the challenge or opportunity you were feeling, and the questions or solutions you started that you posed to yourself, and we'll talk through those in subsequent slides.
Yeah, so thanks. I remember in March 2020, just getting back from a trip from Ghana and getting back in time for our radio fundraising campaign. So we had planned this thing ready to go. And after I got back a couple of weeks, everything was shut down. And it was a challenge for Moody because we were thinking about, okay, what do we do now? We had some donors who were going through some tough times. We had donors who lost family members, and it was, are they still going to stick with us? Are they still going to give to Moody? So we had that external kind of challenge of, is this thing still going to go on? And then also we have a school, and the professors and the students had to shift right away to virtual learning. We had some professors who didn't want to do that for a long time, and just in a few weeks, they had to just all of a sudden move to virtual learning. So it was a challenge as it relates to us in terms of externally, our donors, and then internally, just our students, our staff. How do we keep this thing going? So we really had a couple of questions that we had to ask. Number one was, how can we better serve, add value to our donors during this time? And then the second thing is, how should we as a team hold ourselves accountable during this challenge, and what does success look like in terms of our team moving forward? So we had an external challenge and an internal challenge as well.
Okay, great. So let's jump into some of those external solutions. There's some fascinating research about the way mid-level donors in particular wish to engage with organizations. And unlike their major gift counterparts, they're much less likely to want to engage in person, either an event like a gala or those face-to-face visits. So in some ways, the mass migration we were forced to make to a virtual space actually served mid-level well, forcing our programs and outreach into the space where, frankly, mid-level donors most wanted to engage with us. Talk a little bit about how you and Moody sought to capitalize on this movement, and some creative thinking in ways that you identify as additional ways that you can serve those donors.
So, as you know, this past couple of years, so we were just at home. We couldn't even do anything. So we talked about it at Moody. How can we again add value to our donors? And a couple of things came about that we had to really think creatively about. So we started this thing called Mondays with Moody, and we've got some great, awesome professors at Moody Bible Institute. And as we were talking to donors, mid-level reps, there were certain things that we were hearing that a lot of our donors were just going through, just a lot of worry, just a lot of situations that was tough for them. So we had a professor who could address those issues. So we did Mondays with Moody. It was kind of like a Zoom small group on Mondays where we had actually a lot of our donors tuned in just to be able to hear about, how do you deal with worry in this time? And we felt like this was a good way for us to serve them. So we did that Zoom thing, went really well. Every Monday at 10 a.m. We connected with our donors, and they got a chance to even ask questions to the professor. So that went really well. And then secondly, we've never done this before, where during our Christmas season, our students put on a show, Candlelight Carols, at the Moody Bible Institute. So we have people who travel in to Chicago to come in for this concert. Well, since everything was shut down, we had to move that concert virtually. And it actually was a good thing, because if any of you have been to Chicago during the winter season in December, it's pretty tough to come in. So we had donors and even our listeners who joined in from Florida, sunny Florida, and were able to tune in. So that was really a great thing. And by the way, this was also something that we charged for, and we just made it free. This was a free concert for our donors and listeners to be a part of. Again, this is something we had never done, but we had to, and here's the word that we heard a lot about during COVID, pivot to these couple of things. And it went really well.
Great. And I think, yeah, we've got a couple examples of additional resources you were able to share.
Exactly. So we contacted Moody Publishers, and there were some resources that we felt like would be good for us to share. So these are a couple of resources from one of our professors, Dr. Winfred Neely, and he's just written so well just about how to overcome worry. So these were some resources that we felt like, you know what, let's just send this out to our donors at this time. So one of them was just the scriptures in the Bible that had to deal with worry as a way to encourage our listeners and donors, and then also how to overcome worry. And he just did a great job. And we heard a lot of feedback from our donors that felt like, hey, you are caring for us at this time. You're adding value to us in this pretty intensive time.
Yeah, one of the things I love about this is these are all great kind of showcases of, of the organization and the mission. And in some ways, it is kind of what donor generosity has made possible. And now you're creating a true dynamic of a back and forth of thank you for what you've made possible and being able to serve in some authentic ways. Let's shift in to talk a little bit more about donors and messaging. One of the biggest questions we all dealt with was, how do we talk to supporters over the last couple of years? Should our expectations of the donors shift? Do we change that messaging? Talk through that conversation that you had internally, how you talked with donors over the last couple of years, and kind of the impact that had on your team and on your thinking.
Number one, really what we wanted to focus on as a team is ask this question to our donors on every single call is, how are you doing? How are you doing at this time? And it was just really great as a team when we came together to talk about some of the answers that we got for this. And it's just a lot of issues during that time. So we started doing this word cloud, where as mid-level reps talk to their assigned donors, we track every month. The bigger the word, the more we've heard about in terms of how can we pray for you, what are some of the issues that you're going through right now. So here's an example. Actually, this is a recent one from last month that we had, but we started doing this during the COVID season so that we don't lose sight of some of the things that our donors have been going through. So just doubling down on that. How are you doing? And finding ways that we can be able to add value. And through some of these, that's how we were able to do the Mondays with Moody. We looked at some of our word clouds and kind of figured out who would be some of the people who can be able to address those issues. So how are you doing was a big one. And then note cards. Note cards is really big. I mean, we're in a digital society, but there's something about the good old note card. Getting that note card from a rep saying, thank you so much after the conversation. I'm praying for you and just I'll be following up with you. And we've had donors say that they've put that on their fridge. It's just a great way that they can be able to reflect back on just the value that we add to our donors. So phone calls was a big thing. How are you doing? And then also note cards. Even though we're doing some things that were digital, we zoned in on these couple of things as well.
I love this, Stephen. We talk about the complex, sophisticated, always important donor research and surveys. And, here you've got one of the best sources of it is just, the back and forth dialogue and response to that. How are you doing? So it's fascinating. So let's jump into one of the other things we talked about. We've talked about kind of the donor experience and the focus there. Let's take a little bit of a shift and think about some of the shift that you made internally. The KPIs, the metrics measurements, especially at mid-level, we know that it has to some degree be a numbers game. Talk through some of the changes that you made around how you identified what success looked like, that process, and what those metrics are.
So we have 6 mid-level reps, and they've got 600 each assigned to them. And when we started this 5 years ago, we just said, hey, why don't you, here's a list of people, just call them and just try to talk to somebody on the phone. Well, as you can tell, that's not really clear. There's not enough clarity on that. So there was not enough activity. So we moved to this, which actually really got our team together on one goal, is move into attempts. So not necessarily how many people you talk to, because we realized that we can't control that. We can't control when somebody picks up their phone. So we moved towards attempts. And this brought a lot of clarity to our team. And here's what we wanted to do. Once a rep started, it's 15 attempts per day. And that's picking up the phone and just making the attempt to be able to call. That then becomes 75 attempts a week and then 300 attempts a month. So we started tracking this. And by the way, voicemails do count. I keep on telling the team, and we realize this too as well, of you might not talk to somebody over the phone, but you might be able to leave that voicemail that really encourages them. So we moved in terms of measuring our success from make sure you get somebody on the phone to call to just attempt to call. Attempt to call, we're going to be tracking that. It's amazing throughout the months, we look back. And the reps were just excited about that because now it's so clear. They know what their day entails. They know when the team is winning. They know when they're winning. And this brought just a lot of clarity. But most importantly, it also helped us just to zone in on our activity of people that we hadn't contacted yet on our file. So this brought the team together. And this is something that we don't want to lose sight of, is focusing on their attempts.
Well, and Stephen, I may be stepping on your toes about what we're going to talk about in a second on staffing, but if I remember, the staff really played a pretty big part in owning the metrics here. You really invited them to speak into what they wanted to hold themselves accountable to.
Exactly. So basically what I said was, team, I just called a meeting and I said, what would it look like in a year to make 11,000 attempts to our donors? How are we going to be able to do that? And the team came up with this. Maybe we can do 15 attempts per day. Maybe we can, then that's 75. And that's really the ownership there. I really like that because I didn't want to come from the mountaintop and say, hey guys, here's what we need to do and here's how we're going to do it. I came and said, guys, here's where we want to be at a year from now. How can we get there as a team? And it's fascinating to see the creativity from the team of realizing what are some of the things that they can be able to do. And then also added ownership and excitement to the team moving forward. So this is a dynamic where it's a work between the mid-level manager and the reps to really be able to get through these measurements and define what success looks like.
Great. So let's keep talking about staff for a little bit. Leah, let's go ahead and jump to that next slide. I know finding the right people for mid-level in particular can be tricky. We need those folks with both the great human relationships as well as some comfort in volume and numbers and metrics, lots of attention to detail. You went through a fairly thoughtful process, really reflecting on both the right skill sets and characteristics you wanted when staffing up your team. Talk us through these 5 staff characteristics you looked for.
Yeah, so when we started this a couple of years in, after we had hired some people, we went into this saying, we need an extrovert. Extroverts do a great job as a mid-level rep. Well, we hired one extrovert and that didn't work out so well because we realized is that some extroverts can do good, but also introverts are really good at this role because they listen and they're really good at what they do. So I came together and we just did some thinking of what are some of the things that we're looking for in somebody who's going to succeed as a mid-level rep at the Moody Bible Institute. And we came up with these 5 staff characteristics. Number 1 is genuine care for people. If you don't care about people, this is not a job for you. And I'm talking about genuine care. In other words, you are able to just spend time and talk to people and understand their story and ask those key questions and get to know them a little bit better. Another thing too is a great communicator. This is a person that has to be articulate in terms of sharing the case for support of Moody Bible Institute. But this also includes somebody who's a good listener. because you can't be a great communicator if you don't listen to be able to ask those follow-up questions. So even though it's great communicator here, it also has an element of listening to the conversation, taking notes, asking those follow-up questions to be able to get to know the donor better. And then collaborator. It's a team effort. This is not, we just talked about how we worked on what success looks like as a team. This person has to be somebody who's a great collaborator, somebody who can be able to say, what if we did this? What if we did that? And just work in a team environment. But after we're done with that, this person needs to also be self-motivated. They need to be able to make those calls and keep going, right? And during the COVID season, we're working at home and not in an office environment. So a person like this needs to be somebody who says, okay, I need to keep going and I need to go on. And we've had examples of reps where they've gone through back-to-back conversations where it's been heavy. It's been heavy. Where a donor says, I just lost my husband, I lost a child, and it's back to back, and that could weigh in a lot on mid-level reps. So we talked about being able to take a break, go for a walk once the weather is nice, or do something that can kind of take you away a little bit and then come back, but you need to keep going. Somebody who says, okay, there are more people that need to hear from me. And then also process driven. We talked about this in terms of 15 attempts per day, 75 a week, 300 a month. Every Monday, we're meeting in one-on-ones, just talking about the week. This person needs to have a process in place to be able to get through engagement with their 600 donors. And what does that look like on a weekly basis? So somebody who just kind of says, oh, what am I going to do today? What am I going to do this week? They need to really zone in and be specific about how they're going to be able to measure that. So when we're hiring for mid-level reps, these are the things that we're looking for. And we're kind of scoring these characteristics as we're looking for people to join our team. Okay,
great. So Stephen, talking through kind of the approach for the donor experience, some of the work you did internally, let's get to the headline. Let's talk about the success, some of those results that you saw. Let's jump to that next slide.
Yeah, exactly. So these are the results. So again, we were measuring this engagement is once every 4 months, touching base with their assigned donors. We were at, our goal was to be at 70%, and we went over that, 89%. We celebrated that. Our lapsed donors, these are donors who haven't given in 12 months. We wanted to be at 5%, and through that engagement, the team was able to be at 4%. And again, this is last year, June 30th, our results. And in phone conversations, this is really a big for us. We wanted to be able to get to the point where we're having those phone conversations, and the team was able to go over that and those attempts. And then also too, this is the revenue part. And I believe that if we do the first three things, the results are going to take care of themselves. So we wanted to be at 15% in terms of our revenue from our portfolio. And we celebrated that 20.99%. And then here is something that we're still working on. We got close last year, is mid-level reps too need to be thinking about who can we move up that pipeline? Who can we move up to that major rep? So we had a goal of 120 last year. We got close, 115 in terms of as they are having their conversations, they're listening out for people who want to be involved more and coordinating with the major gift reps to see if we can pass them on. This is what we call our graduation class, people that we can be able to move on. So we ended up at 115, and the team is actually doing a great job now as we're moving towards our goal here this year as well.
Wonderful. Yeah, this is where you kind of, so as I said, this is kind of the headline to me, the proof in that pudding, if you will. So let's take a moment, step back, get a little reflective, talk about some key takeaways, lessons learned. You talked through kind of that process around that was while you were living within the pandemic. But what are those pieces you're taking with you? Pieces that may apply to other organizations as they're looking to stand up or expand or formalize their mid-level program. Talk a little bit about those kind of key moments for you.
Yeah, and I would say it's three things. Number one is it's all about the donor. Donor first, and we realized that during COVID too, just zoning in more on that. It's all about the donor, talking to them in terms of what journey are they on, what are they passionate about, and how can we tie that to the mission of our organization. So we're not going into this to just figure out, I really need to get this person to give everything. No, we need to empower the donor, add value to the donor. It's all about the donor first. That's the very, very first thing in terms of all our experiences, phone calls, note cards, whatever it is. And then we also need to define success. What does success look like for us as a team? And the team needs to have a say in that as mid-level reps. Is what direction are we going? How will we know when we've won? What does winning look like? And I think a lot of times, if that's vague, it becomes, it's just not a good thing to have, because you don't know what's expected of you. And it's just not appealing to be in an environment like that. So defining that success, I think, is very, very, very important with the team of where are we going, what direction, and how will we know when we've arrived. And then hire the right people. Know what kind of people you are looking for this role, because we've gone through this too before, where it's like you hire somebody who you thought was going to be great at the role, but if you have not defined what that looks like, that could be a challenge. So you need to be able to hire the right people. And before you do that, you need to list some of the characteristics of a person that will succeed in this role. So these are the three takeaways. I would say donor first, define what success looks like, and then hire the right people.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. So if you're an organization that has a mid-level program, you want to think about, how do I expand or take it to the next level? Or I just need to start from square one. Where do we start? I always say start with, segmentation matters. Think about our mid-level donors. It tends to be a pretty big pool. It's larger than we can just kind of wrap our arms around with that personalized experience that a major gift might have. But we want to create more personalized communication, donor recognition at that level. Why? Obviously, we see the increase engagement, greater and more frequent giving. We're seeing an uptick that's sustaining around, no pun intended, sustainer giving. We know from mid-level donors that can be an appealing experience for them. And that can start with segmentation. So how do we begin to identify segmentation? There's several different ways, grouping based on similarities or affinities, similar areas of interest, and not just where they have historically given, but other areas where they've attended events. Do they like events? What premiums are they interacting with? How do they engage with your brand? Categorized by giving levels, especially within if you're thinking about standing up a mid-level giving society, that's going to be an important one. But too often we start and stop there. So I encourage, by similarities, by base attributes, how do they see themselves? What groups do they or might they align with? And of course, all of that driving, receiving versions of communications. There's an important study that came out that highlighted the renewed and increasing importance from a donor perspective on getting a personalized experience. And that has to start with understanding how they identify with your brand, what segments they might fall into, who they are, both within and outside their organization. Who are they in their giving outside of you? And knowing these things lets us build, from a mid-level perspective, both something that feels hyper-personalized, but also creates opportunity for automation and to leverage technology to support that so that we can manage it in a reasonable way. Because as you heard Stephen talk about, those are some big numbers that without segmentation, without some automation and processes in place to support the mid-level gift officers, it would be really tricky to apply that experience that we want them to have. So we'd love to continue the conversation with you. Reach out. We'd be happy to talk. We've got more resources. And Leah, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk through some of that and wrap us up for the day.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, Stephen, for sharing this story with us. I was personally really encouraged, and especially when we get to that last slide when we see the results. So thank you both. As you are wrapping up our webinar today, we have some additional resources that we like to share with you all around both major giving and mid-level giving. You can use this QR code right here to grab those resources. And if you have any other questions about how to get at some of those segmentation abilities that Kristen shared with you, we would love to give you a tour of our own proprietary system that allows us to perform some of that advanced segmentation. And we would also just love to sit down and talk with some of what some of those pain points are that you might have around starting a mid-level giving program, looking at your file to see if you've got prospects who would be a great foundation for that. However we can serve you, we would love to further that conversation. Without any further ado, I'll go ahead and wrap us up for today, just about right on time. Thank you to everyone who was able to join. And once again, you can look for the recording and the slides in your inbox within about 24 hours.
Thank you.